Okay, great. Welcome. We will get started. It looks like everyone can hear us okay. If something happens and you can't hear us for some reason, just let us know in the chat box, and that way we can adjust things, but it shows us that everything is okay. So we just wanted to say welcome. This is, I think, our third or fourth OTF webinar, and we're really excited to be able to share a little bit of our learning and our reflections with you today. So we will get started, and as we go, if you have some questions, you can add them to the chat box and we'll try to engage with them as we go. We also have planned in some time for talking and collaborating, which is a little bit different online, but if you haven't been in a webinar before, it becomes a little bit more comfortable. So we'll give a little bit of processing time for you to type and to share your thinking, and we will get started. So I'm Tracy, and Cheryl is my teaching partner. We have been co-teaching in kindergarten for 5 years together. We've been very lucky to be partners for 5 years. So a lot of our learning has transformed, and we've been able to reflect together to build on each other's capacities and to move forward together. Today we're going to share a little bit about small group instruction and how we've made some big shifts in our teaching practice in how we engage with small group instruction, and we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your reflections as you've gone forward in the process as well. So just on this slide here, you can see we have a couple of hashtags, Connecting Learners and OTF Connect. If you're able to tweet along or tweet out after, that would be a great way to keep the discussion going and to engage with more professional learning outside of the webinar. So just to get started, it's nice to kind of feel out where people are coming from. We have 55 people in already. So if you are currently in a kindergarten role, show us the green check mark. And if you're in a different role, maybe you're a consultant, maybe you're in a 1, 2, or 3 classroom, maybe you're a planning time educator, maybe you could share that in the chat and then just indicate that with the red X. So it looks like there's a few people that are in different roles. If you want to share with us maybe what your role is, that sometimes gives us a little bit of perspective as we're engaging. Wow, Caitlin has a grade 1, 2, and 3 class. Connie is a consultant. Great, Jennifer looks like she's thinking ahead to next year. Tricia has an interesting blend, SK1, early reading. Patty has a big mix. Kindy planning and 4 to 6 French. That's a lot. Great. Thanks for sharing that. So that gives us a bit of an idea as to where people are coming from. We know in this room today that there's going to be a lot of experience here, so we're really looking forward to you sharing your knowledge and adding to this so that we can collaborate together as a team too.
So with that said, we do truly believe that the best resource is each other. So if you'd like to share your Twitter handle in the chat, or maybe a blog that you're connected with in the comments, and then also using the hashtag again, Connecting Learners or OTF Connects. That way later on in the day, we can go back, reflect, see some of our thoughts, and even maybe share some of our resources that have also been effective in all of our classrooms.
And just so you know, this is all being recorded. So if you miss things now, OTF will publish this later on. So you can always go back and scroll through the chat as the presentation goes on if you want to write something down or if you want to go back and review things too. I see lots and lots of Twitter handles, and that would be such a great way to expand our networks. And then I'm seeing some blogs being shared as well.
So to get our conversation started, we wanted to put it out to you to share what challenges you find in planning and implementing small group instruction.
Feel free to use your microphone or to chat in the box as well. You can even write directly on the screen, anything that you're able to share. What are some of the challenges of implementing that small group instruction? Shelley points out something really big that I hear a lot is that noise level in the room. Time. Time is always a piece of the puzzle.
Making it to all children.
Fitting everyone in. Behavior. Interruptions.
Yeah, making it quick and engaging.
Balancing small group instruction and documentation is a huge piece of that puzzle too.
Meeting everyone's needs.
Distractions. It always seems that the phone rings as soon as you get there and get started with a group. Janet, I like your reflection too, missing the magic in the room when you're focused on that small group. It's so important to have that in your brain too, to think through how many small groups are we doing, how much are we engaged with small groups, and how much are we actually a part of the play. Great. So, we found that we also were experiencing pretty much most of what you're sharing above. We were having some really rich conversations after school, talking about how are we going to get to all these kids? How are we going to do all these groups with guided reading? How are we going to do all these writing groups? Are we going to do these math groups? And then we want to do groups that, art groups. We want to do sketching. So we started like adding it up, and there was hundreds of groups that we were wanting to see and engage with each week. But then, just as someone kind of shared above, we were noticing that if we just engaged ourselves always only in small group instruction, then we weren't able to be in the moment and to be in the play and to take that time to honor the children's interests and the children's direction. So we had a lot of really big conversations, and we made some tweaks to our day. Now, this isn't to say that we only do small group at one time, but we've moved some things around in our day, and we're going to share that with you so that you can see how we've shifted things a little bit, and then we'll explain to you a little bit about why we did that. So, the flow of the day, this is our flow. We've written a blog about this as well, and we've thought a lot about how our day is structured to really support our students. And so what our day looks like is this. We start outside, and we do outdoor learning for about an hour. After about 45 minutes or so, depending on the day, one of us will bring a small group inside to do some reading instruction. We'll bring in probably 8 to 10 children, and then we will do some small group reading instruction. After about 15 minutes or so, the rest of the class and the educator who's outdoors will bring the rest of the children in so that we're all together again, and that's when we go into our small group time. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like in a minute, but that's when we engage in this small group time where every child is a part of a different small group, and it's for about 10 to 15 minutes, and we will talk more about what that looks like. Then we have nutrition break. And we aren't off the grid in terms of our schedule. We are on our bell schedule. However, in kindergarten, we have some flexibility with 5 minutes here or 5 minutes there. So we are a little bit flexible, but for the most part, we do follow the same structure as the rest of our school. We have 2 nutrition breaks. So we are outside, we come in, we do small group instruction, and then we go to lunch. So they get a long chunk of uninterrupted play outdoors in the outdoor environment. We do a little bit of focused small group learning for 10 to 15 minutes, then we have lunch. After lunch, we move into learning centers, and we have about an hour to an hour and a half-ish in learning centers, and then we have focused learning, which is whole group community time. Then we have another small group time, and then we go to nutrition break. So the focused learning, 10 minutes or so, maybe it's a read aloud, maybe we're doing some project work, we're talking about documentation. Today we talked about QR codes with our kids, and then that small group time, all children are engaged in a small group in the classroom, and again, we'll talk more about what that looks like. We go to nutrition break, and then we spend the last hour of the day outdoors. So that's sort of what our day looks like in terms of structure. when do you have prep and who's with your students? So Cheryl and I, Cheryl is here during nutrition break with the children, and then my planning time falls this year during the outdoor learning at the beginning of the day. Last year, it fell during small group time. So during that small group time, our planning time teacher took the same role. We talk about doing this seamless transition when we go to planning, that we plan our day so that it's best for the children, and then the adults navigate in and out of the classroom to support the needs of the children. So is that second small group time just after the whole group learning time? If so, what are the other kids doing? So yes, both small group times. So we do the whole group where we clean up from learning centers, we meet as a whole group for 10 minutes or so, and then we move, and Cheryl and I will let them know which small group they're in, and we're going to talk more about that. So if that's what you're wondering, hold that for a minute. And all the children go back into small groups. So there's 2 times a day when our children are all in small group instruction. So let's just see if we can answer a couple of these questions, and then we'll move on, because I know whenever we present and share, flow of the day is always something that people are trying to perfect and alter and change and play with. And this is what works for us. This is what works for our group, but it might not work for everybody.
And if you do want to get some more insight as to what our flow of the day looks like, you can also go to our blog, which has a very detailed outline that might help answer some of your questions as well.
So Hannah, we start our day at 9, and we come in probably by about 10:15. We do small groups until about 10:30, 10:40, and then from 10:40 to 10:50 we're transitioning into lunch, and our first lunch is at about 11. So it's not exactly perfect in terms of timing, because we know children don't follow a schedule in that exact way, but we are usually ready to eat lunch just before 11 or at 11. And Deanna, we're going to come back and talk about whether it's one group at a time or what that looks like. We don't go outside during nutrition break. I think that might be part of the questions that are happening. We are inside for the entire nutrition break. And we will, if you look on our blog, there's a post about the flow of the day that goes into more detail. And if you have more questions on that, please just send us a quick email or connect with us on Twitter, and we will go into a little bit more detail about that. But we just wanted to show you that our small group time is not during learning centers or outdoor learning. Of course, we naturally engage in small groups at that time with children, but our planned small group instruction is a time that's separate on its own. So we're going to show you what that looks like with plenty of examples. So if you hang tight, you'll get to see that too.
So again, thinking about some of Tracy and I's reflections and challenges that we were feeling in the sense of our room, some of them was we just wanted to provide them a time to practice. And often what we were finding is when the children were engaged in play, we were entering their play, and say, for example, they were working on building a Tim Hortons in the building area, we were finding that we were entering their play with an intention and not joining with a genuine intention to play alongside them and really engage in conversation, and we were missing other learning opportunities. We also felt that it was stifling their play because we were coming in with that intention. So having them write a sign, even though it was a good thing that was connected to the play, it could become really frustrating for some of the kids who maybe just were more interested in taking the orders or being the cook in the back. So we were finding we were stifling their play. And then we were also finding that when our small group was during play, we were seeing a lot of spike in behavior because children weren't wanting to leave their play to come join us. And I think we were also noticing that what message are we actually sending to children then? We were feeling as though we were sending the message that their play wasn't valued. So that was some of our reflections as we thought about how are we going to restructure this.
Can everyone hear okay? Is it just Kathy, or are we cutting out for other people as well? It's showing that it's working for us. Okay, cutting out a bit. Okay. Sometimes it just depends on the connection. Okay, So we'll keep going, and hopefully, again, just let us know if it's not clear. Okay, sorry about that. Some of the little glitches, I guess, being online. Someone also asked, what if it's raining all day when you're supposed to be outdoors? Well, we definitely take that into consideration and think about how can we engage in some gross motor things indoors. We have a dance studio, we have yoga mats, and we would just switch that to indoor learning centers. We talk the kids through that transition, and we actually often go outside when it's a little bit rainy too. So we don't necessarily just stay in, but when it gets really, really cold, we sometimes will make those adjustments, but we just teach the children that if there's a reason that we can't be outside one day, then we will switch that to an indoor learning time. And then being mindful as educators about that energy level. So, how does it work? So let's talk through how it works. We have 26 to 28 children as well, so it does work. Let us talk you through what it looks like for us, and that might give you a little bit of ease in understanding what it looks like and how it goes. So we have several small groups of children, and they're simultaneously engaged based on their needs and their development. One educator is going to work with a small group, and they're going to provide more close guidance and support. So we will show you some examples as we go through, but one of us might have a group, and the other educator, is going to facilitate the other small groups that are more independent in what they're doing. Once we start to show you some examples, you'll see how we make this work, but one educator really sits or engages and collaborates with one group, and one educator floats. So we'll show you as we go what that looks like.
And again, Tracy had mentioned earlier, how does that look for our planning time teachers? So if this did lie during your planning time, we would just have communicated with our planning time teacher what has been planned, what was the structure and the language around that small group, and he or she would just seamlessly come in and take that role, whether it was their turn to provide that close guidance, or if it was a day where they were just up and supporting and facilitating some of the independent learning that was happening in the room. And then sometimes we also have some great volunteers. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a high school student, but we also try and utilize our volunteers to engage in some of the small group activities too. Board games are a great way to also provide that volunteer with an experience with the children too.
And if you look in this photo here, you can see that one of us is engaged at the moon table there, and that was around the time of our Terry Fox run. So we're doing a small group where we're counting the money that we've been raising as a class, sorting money, talking about money, what are we noticing on it, how could we sort it. You'll see at the table to the left, there's whiteboards and writing materials. That's another small group that's engaged independently. In the middle table there, you'll see there's some snap cubes on the table. Those children are engaged independently. Maybe they've been given a prompt. Over in our building area, we'll get to that, Cheryl. Over in our building area, we have some different building materials, and then in our dance studio in the very far back, there's some children that are working on puzzles. So it's a good question because we've gone through this many, many times and had this discussion. So traditionally, and some people still use that structure, there are these must-do jobs where the children, there's a list of 5 or 6 things that the children are going to complete and work on in the week. But as you see through this presentation, we're going to continue to share, but as you see us go through this, the children are not plotted and rotated through groups at all. So as we continue to go, I want you to think about how we've structured that, and then I would like to come back to that conversation to see if your shifting in that must-do stance has changed. So let's continue to go through, but we would like to talk more about that too. So, no matter the specific activity, the benefit of small group learning context is that the teacher can observe the child's understanding and approach more readily, provide more specific directions and for the children who need them, and tailor feedback to a child's specific needs. So this is where when we have that time, we're able to engage with what they are understanding, we're able to provide those instructions, and we're able to tailor those things. We know that that's the important piece and the power of small group instruction.
I see Sarah's comment, do they have to stay in the same group? We do have the children stay in the small group, same group, sorry, because it is for such a short amount of time. We do ask them to stay there, and we'll sort of go through and guide you on how we sustain them in that one area through some tips along the way.
And Liz, this year, Cheryl and I are both here during small group instruction, but last year when it was during my planning time, the planning time teacher met with Cheryl and they collaborated to plan the small group instruction each week. So I wasn't planning for my planning time teacher, she was collaborating with Cheryl. And the groups do change every day. We're getting there. I know you guys are
great question.
trying to think about it. So we're getting there. Great questions.
So we wanted to also make sure that we were choosing intentional materials and activities to support the students' needs and development. So something that we did as a kindergarten team was we went through all the materials in every single classroom, and we compiled all of the blocks, Lego pieces, whatever it might be, and it was great because we were able to purge things that just weren't intentional or useful, or maybe that didn't have enough pieces. And then we had an abundance amount of certain materials that could be brought in the classroom. And then this really helped us because these materials weren't always stored in our classroom. And when we were bringing them out for small group, we always tried to have the materials that are in our small group different from what's always out during the day during learning centers. We found it helps them in sustaining in that area, and they also see it as a new material that they have for a period of time where they can go deeper into and explore and play with.
Mm-hmm. A couple of great questions here. So the activities in your room look like things they put up at tabletop centers, which is yet another way that a lot of educators might structure that time. So what is out during small groups does not go out during the day. So it is not something that if we have puzzles out during small group, those are puzzles that are just out for small group. So it's something new, it's something that they maybe haven't used before, it's something different, it's not the same as what's out during that long chunk of learning center time. So it is something different. Does every child go to every center? So this might help you when we're starting to think of that must-do job. We do not have every child rotate through the centers. If a child does not distinguish between a letter and a number, we aren't going to ask them to engage maybe in a writing task that week. We might have that child, maybe they have some fine motor needs that we've recognized. So we may engage with them using scissors at the Play-Doh area. So every child does not go to every center. No matter what centers are out, we have the children and they go, we plot them every week based on where they need to be. So they don't all go to every center. How do we plan? We're going to share a little bit about how we capture that learning, but each week Cheryl and I reflect on our documentation and assessment. So we take a little bit of time, we think about the patterns and things that we're seeing in their learning. And then we think about ways to engage the students' needs. So at the beginning of the year, there's a small group of students that really need practice with their name. So we might think about what sorts of activities will engage them in working with their name. And that might be something that they go to. If Cheryl knows how to write her name, I'm not asking Cheryl to practice her name on a whiteboard because that's not something she needs to practice. So we aren't having the children go to things that they don't need to go to. We're thinking very specifically, and you'll start to see patterns in your group. These kids need this, these children need that, and then we think creatively, what are some ways that we can engage that with those students in the context of a small group so that they can practice and they can take those skills then and use them in the context of their play. So this is just a short, it's only 10 or 15 minutes, twice a day, but it's a short time to practice a skill. And we talk to the kids about that. It's not a job. They're not going and doing a worksheet. They're not going and doing a job. They are taking 10 to 15 minutes twice a day to practice something. And it might be, it'll look very different. We're going to give you lots and lots of examples. But let's take a look at some of these questions. So Do the students in the small groups change each week? If not, how often? Yes. The groups are not even together. Cheryl and I might be in the same group day 1. Day 2, we're going to be in different groups. We're not together. So we don't have 4 kids that rotate through things together. Every single day looks different. We're going to show you our template on how we sort of plot it, and it's made it really quick and easy for us to do. But every day looks a little different, and the kids don't even stay in the same group every day. And so we assign them where they go, that's right, Hannah, based on their needs. So if a student needs fine motor, you specifically plan a fine motor center to send them to. And we look for patterns. So we say, okay, Cheryl needs that, Hannah needs that, Patty needs that. Those 3, let's think of something that they can do next week, and maybe they're going to go there a couple of times to practice their fine motor development. So it's very, very strategic and thought out. It's not, here's 6 groups, let's rotate the kids through. That's not what it is. And don't forget, we're not just looking at math and literacy skills, we are looking at social skills. We're looking at fine motor, we're looking at gross motor, and we're thinking, how can we strategically find moments for the kids to practice the things that they need?
So this is the template that we typically use when we are jogging notes, anecdotal notes, when we are in our small groups. Again, this is mostly when we are in that close guidance with them. So where you see the rectangles is just the child's name. We just covered it for privacy reasons. And then as we meet with the kids every day, we'll have 3 or 4, and we just jog our notes in as we had seen our observations come up. And then that way, when we are planning, we can say, okay, we didn't see this child, and this child. Let's plot them in for these days. And then once the template is filled, say we're zoning in on subitizing for that week or 2 weeks. Tracy might be doing subitizing within a board game. I might be doing dot plates. So it's 2 different experiences, but 2 different contexts. So then we can see, okay, this is what Bobby did with me. This is what Bobby did with you. Is this a skill that has been attained, or is this still a developing skill? So we can have that conversation within our team. And then we can also see some patterns that are happening. You know, these children are struggling with the conceptual subitizing, so verbalizing that they can see the part whole. So let's group these 3 children in a game next week, and maybe even throw in a child that has really solidified this skill, just so that they can hear that modeling of the language while we're playing the game.
Great. And we also find that when we're documenting this small group instruction, it's also giving us leads to provocations that we can put out in learning centers. So this documentation, this act of documenting our learning, is supporting us in our planning in lots of different ways. I'm going to ask that we maybe open it up for a little discussion now, because I'm seeing a lot of chatter, and we hear this a lot when we present, that co-planning time is an issue. It is. We are not going to pretend that it's not. Everyone's aware that that's a huge piece of the puzzle. Cheryl and I are very fortunate in our board to have a short little bit of time before and after school to take some time to quickly plan and debrief. We always say to each other, you need to come prepared and we need to be ready so that we can be as effective as possible with our planning time. However, we've also taught in an extended day classroom, and we had to be a lot more creative in the moment and how we did that. So I want to open it up, and let's make this a really positive discussion. What are some ways, and maybe some secret ways, that you've found time to collaborate and connect as a teaching team in order to plan and document? So you can chat with your mic or in the chat. Let's take a positive spin on this, because it's not something that we can necessarily control. We don't necessarily have the magic answer to that, but what are some ways? What are some things that you're doing? Great, Christine. Google Docs is fantastic because both of you can have access and see it. See a lot of Google Forms and Docs. Great way, because then when you walk into that planning meeting, you already both have a context. You've seen that information. Seesaw, similar, very good, Tricia. It's a great strategy, and we use Seesaw even with our families, which is awesome. Google Keep, I don't know that one, Christina. Can you tell us more about that? So OneNote. I'm seeing lots of technology. We chat and text outside. Sometimes it's a phone call once a week. You know, like once we get home and we get settled, let's call each other at 8 o'clock for a half hour. And again, we have to be mindful and we have to honor where everybody's coming from in their lives. Sometimes people have very young children or elderly parents or a really busy schedule. So we have to really be honoring where our partners are and where they're coming from too. Great.
And I also think of what is actually manageable for your team. Sometimes you can have a template that looks really great on paper, but if you have 5 really good-looking templates and you're spending more of your time filling them out rather than it being a good communication tool or a planning tool, if you're spending more time just filling it out, maybe say to yourself, how can I condense this and how can we make it more effective?
I saw a ton of really good ideas. I'm going to look more. Cheryl knows Google Keep. I've not really heard of that as much. So we're going to look into some of those too, some really great ideas. And it's clear that you're a very positive, reflective group of educators that are finding ways to make this happen. And you need to know that the unions and teaching federations and school boards and system levels, they're all aware of this too. And I think that they're having those rich conversations. But it's going to take time and it is a bit of a process. So thanks for being positive with us and thinking of those ways. It is a really big challenge. And when Cheryl and I did Extended Day together, that was one of our biggest challenges is we had to be so creative. Sometimes we even did like a learning buddy system where we partnered with a grade 5 class and we switched on and off, and then we would take a little bit of time to plan and then the grade 5s would take some time to plan. There's lots of creative ways if you work closely with your administrator, and it looks like you already have a lot of creative ways to plan. So the more planning time we get, the better everything we'll get, but thanks for helping us to think of some positive ways to go about that.
As we mentioned earlier in the chat, some people are using Seesaw. This is something that we have really gravitated towards. It's also supported our relationships with our families and seeing what sort of experiences their children are having in these small groups. And a lot of families have even connected with us saying, thanks for showing me that. That's something that we're now trying at home, which is another great thing because now they're getting even more practice in scaffolding those fun ways to do it with their families.
So Cheryl and I wanted to share this. We use Google Drive and Google Docs to create our small group planning template. So you can see on this file, this is sort of a little bit of a screenshot of what it might look like. At the top where it says student names, we would have all of our students' names there so we can quickly plot their names into our graph. We may have more or less little things on the side depending on our groups and our structure. We always think how many children can engage in the different task areas and think carefully about that plotting too. So along the top you'll see it says small group. So these are the different small groups that one of us would be sitting and focusing on. We've done read alouds where we might focus on new vocabulary and animals, and that small group might have 10 to 12 children in it. So when we do a read aloud, it might have a larger group, and then the other children are engaged, again, in some small groups. And if I was doing the read aloud, Cheryl would be engaging with the other children. Sometimes we will do some printing. So there maybe is a group that's really working on fine motor. We aren't doing printing books with 28 kids. We are choosing some children who are excited about writing, who want to write, and we're going to work maybe on a whiteboard, maybe using different tools to practice some printing and writing and letter formation. Along the side here, along the left-hand side, you'll see it says whiteboards, and we try and add in a teaching point. That way we're transparent to administrators and parents, anybody who's kind of curious about what's happening. We have a puzzle matching game. We have these lines and curves where children can build letters. We've written down Play-Doh. So those are some examples, and then we would plot the children's names either in that small group at the top or in one of those side groups. And like I said, depending on the week, we may have 5 or 10 things listed on the side.
And to answer Andrea's questions, we don't base it on age. We base it on their development and needs. And then also, how can we also scaffold some of those children so that we're also co-learning together?
a lot of that Read Aloud group, for example, is a blend of JK and SK students, but it's a lot of students that we have a very, very high English language learner population. So I think there's probably almost 70% of our class are English language learners. And so we've been doing read alouds to just work on developing vocabulary. And so that's a blended group, lots of different ability levels and lots of different needs, but our focus is on vocabulary development. Give us a copy of this example. We can, yeah, it's just a chart, but we can share that for sure. I'll make up a mock-up of it, and I'll send it to Molly, and then she'll put that out with the email later on. No problem.
So we also want to reach out to you guys because we also know that you guys probably have some templates or strategies that are really working right now in your classroom as well. So again, you can use the hashtag Connecting Learners or hashtag OTF Connects, and as well as the chat. And we just want to give you some time to share your planning tools, templates, or strategies that you use with your team.
And we know we kind of just opened this up with a similar question before. That was a little bit more sporadically based on the discussion. So if you've already shared, Seesaw or Google Drive, if you use any other planning templates or strategies, this could be an opportunity to share them. Lots of schools, we've seen a lot of educators using Sesame. Some boards have different restrictions on what can be used. Some boards say yes to Seesaw, some boards say yes to Sesame, some really adopt Google. So sometimes it's a little bit about being flexible in terms of what your board allows to. That's great, Karina. It's always a good first step to kind of play with a tool before you make it public to parents. Or even your partner. Sometimes you have to play with something. We downloaded a bunch of different apps and we've played with them and used them a lot. When Cheryl and I first started, we used Notability to collect documentation, but we've shifted a little bit now because Notability doesn't connect both of us together. So we've shifted a little bit in what we prefer in terms of tools for planning as well. Our board also created these big wall posters that allow a space for planning. We could probably share some sort of template with you as well if that's something that's of interest, and it allows some space to plan for learning centers, but it also leaves some space for planning for small group instruction too. Jessica, that's a great idea too, using sticky notes, especially when you're in an extended day classroom. If you can have something on a desk or on a wall where all of you can contribute, that sometimes makes the planning process a little bit easier. That's a great idea, Shelley. We do that for gym as well. We don't take everybody to gym, we use that time, and some people that we've worked with have talked about using that time for small group instruction as well. Great. So, thanks for sharing those things. Those are some really great ideas. I see a lot of familiar names, and I know that we've connected on social media too, so I know that there's some really great things happening out there and things that people have tried, so it's really helpful to see. We wanted to show you now a little bit about some specific things that are happening, and this might give you a bit more context to what it looks like. We don't want you to overthink it. It's simple, but we want you to think in each photo, it's very much grounded in what each child needs. We are not placing children randomly. It is very, very intentional.
And I think going back to the beginning of this chat tonight where a lot of people were facing that challenge of how do you manage this, here's an example at the beginning of the year. You can see that, I mean, it's a very small picture, but me and Tracy at the beginning of the year, we are both up and we are both supporting and we are both facilitating them staying in their center, engaging with the materials, and also building the relationships with the children, because that is also a major layer and foundation before us even going more into that close guidance instruction. So at the beginning of the year, we have very simple materials out where they can be more independent in, but also provides us some insight and the opportunity for us to both float and support them sustaining that for that short amount of time.
And so you can even see in this picture, both of those tables have 6 children at each, and they're all engaged on whiteboards. We have name cards out for them to use. They can draw, they can write, but sometimes at the beginning of the year, there's a lot of anxiety as kids come in too, and maybe they've never picked up a marker. Maybe they've never picked up a pencil. So we talk to them about how this is a time for us to just take a little bit of time to practice. And so 12 children right off the bat are engaged on whiteboards, and Cheryl and I are walking between and supporting them based on what they need. Are they needing to practice their name? Are they needing to work on a specific letter? Are they just working on lines and curves? But really, really simple at the beginning of the year.
And then as time goes on, we might even just make a little addition to that area. So you can see here, we've now just added magnetic letters. So can you build your name? And then they also have the option of writing with a marker as well. Some children will just draw, and we sort of just allow that to happen because we also think good drawers become good writers, and it's that early stage of just getting that marker to the whiteboard. And then also thinking about different forms, even thinking about some of your sensory learners and by providing them with Play-Doh to build their name. And then as the year progresses, we do have name tags for all the children. You can see how there's a genuine interest as that confidence builds, and as time has gone on with practice, and as relationships are building in the classroom, they're wanting to practice some of the other children's names and also refer to their friends. This is a cool challenge that we also did in a small group, is we put some whiteboards out, some names in the middle, and then we scattered some of the letters on the whiteboards, and they had to be detectives and figure out whose name was on each whiteboard.
So thinking about, again, we're keeping these open-ended, but we're also thinking about what children need to go where. So this little guy on the left, this group of children were really getting excited about numbers. They were engaging with the numbers on the wall. So we just thought, sometimes we overthink it. Let's be simple. Let's put out playing cards and magnetic numbers. Let's see what they do in that group. Again, this could be a provocation, but sometimes children don't engage with provocations during learning centers. Maybe they want to do something else. We don't want to always drive what they're doing at that time, so we give them lots of time to make choices in the day. But at this time, we're going to say, hey, come on over here. We're going to play with these materials for a little while, and let's see what happens. So this was a sort of open-ended thing that we had out. Some of them sorted them, some of them ordered them. There was lots of different learning that happened just with magnetic numbers and playing cards. We also, if you can see on the right, this little guy, we looked around and we thought, who are the children that are picking up books? And who are the children that aren't interested in stories? And we slowly but surely started to build little groups of children, 2 or 3, that could spend some time in the book nook, and we talked to them about what types of books they liked or what things they were interested in. And that week, they had that small group time to spend in the book nook area. So they could look at the pictures. We talked about how you could make up your own story. So that was at the beginning of the year. Sometimes we choose an area in the classroom that maybe children are hesitant to go to, and then we give them that opportunity to spend time there. Margaret had a good question. Where do you store your materials for small groups? And because they're not out for learning centers, which is right, and who sets them up? So we set up our first set of small groups in the morning before the day starts because we're outside all morning. And then when we come in, the first set is already kind of set up. The second small group time happens after learning centers. So we do a really gradual tidy. We don't put on tidy up music. We just gradually tidy in each area. And then we have now at this point in the year, the children help us to set materials out. And Cheryl and I just slowly plop things out on the tables or on the floor. And then we tuck them away. We have a cupboard. And we have the top cupboard is all of our first small group. And the bottom part of the cupboard is our second small group stuff. So any ideas for students that can read books that the educator can read? How do you challenge them? It's a great question. Just thinking about what interests them. If they're already reading books that you can read in the kindergarten age group, I would just think about how can you continue to foster their love for reading. So maybe you have them practice a favorite story of theirs and read it aloud to the class, so they could use some time during small group to practice that book, and then they could maybe during a focused learning read it to the entire class. A couple other questions that we'll answer and then we'll keep going. How many FDK classes are in your school? So we started, when we merged all the materials, we had 6 sections, so 6 different classrooms. Our numbers fluctuate quite a bit, so we're down to 4 this year. How many students are generally in each small group? It really varies, Patty. Sometimes there's 6, sometimes there's 2, depends on what it is. Sometimes there's 12 or 14. And how do you and others manage with daycare? When we were in an extended day classroom, we just talked about which spaces we could keep which materials in. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. I see some questions about what we do during learning centers and that sort of thing. We can refer you, if you check out our blog or email us a little bit, we can direct you on our blog for that, just because we won't have time to engage with all of those types of wonderings. But we do have some great blogs with pictures and ideas. And Asma, that's a good question. Are activities different during both sessions? Yes, they are. So we have different things during both small group times. Another thing that we often, like children love puzzles, but sometimes they're so busy during the day that they don't take the time to slow down and take a puzzle off the shelf. So we do have some puzzles that are out in our book nook that children can access, but we also have puzzles that we bring out just at that small group time. So we have lots of different floor puzzles and wooden puzzles, and we even differentiate our groups based on what they can do. Some children are using peg puzzles. Some children are able to engage with bigger floor puzzles at this point in the year, or sometimes even earlier in the year. So that's, again, a differentiated task, but we might put a child there who's a little stronger, and then some children who are learning and developing that skill, and that also creates an opportunity for leadership and for mentoring within the social group too.
Here again is, you can see the children building a puzzle. As they've kind of established the routines and expectations within small groups, sometimes as the children become more familiar with what other tools are in the classroom, they may ask to go get it and bring it to their small group. So for example, this child just has a letter soundboard that they're making reference to as they're going through the alphabet. So as the year progresses, we also do see that happening, and we allow that because that is part of their learning and their growth and developing.
So Andrea's asking if they didn't complete a puzzle. Sometimes, especially in that morning, we often put puzzles in the morning, and I would say 90% of the time, the children have enough time to complete them because we're giving them a puzzle that makes sense for their development and for what they're able to do. But if they don't finish it, we might say to them, did you want to take it apart, or do you want to save it and you can work on it at the beginning of learning centers to finish it? And that's a choice that we let them make too.
We're going to just let you see this video, and it's just a simple way of how they were engaged with books and songs, and also to provide some of the teaching points that we were also focusing on during our guided reading.
So I think we're going to share the link. Perfect. If you can click on that link, it's only a couple of minutes. Good. So that we just thought that was a great clip for you to be able to see. We'll give maybe 30 more seconds. I see a few more people that are just kind of maybe finishing the video up. Once you've finished, just give us a green check so that we know. Great. Looks like everybody's seen it. It's just a short clip, but we just thought it would be kind of neat to see what it looks like. For sure you could use headphones. We have a listening center too, but we didn't find that it was distracting for our children at that point in the year. In September, it might be something that's harder to do it that way, but you could have headphones in a listening center on too. Just simple, right? Keep it simple. So we want to tell you about a really cool small group experience that we learned about at a workshop, and then we tried in our classroom too. So sometimes when you think of small groups, like this last one here, you're thinking, okay, that's a literacy focus. There is a very clear literacy focus. But here, as we move into this next example, we want to challenge you to think, a small group should engage with more than one area of the curriculum, if possible. Not always. Sometimes we want to target a specific skill and really support that. But if you can engage with math, literacy, personal and social development, it's going to make it a richer experience. So a few years ago, we went to a workshop and a teacher shared with us that she did a challenge where her and her partner created a structure and they took 3 different photos. So this is what they did. They took a front view, a side view, and an aerial view. And then they presented the children with one at a time, or you could give them all 3. You can sort of decide how you structure this problem. You take the structure down and you give them the photos. And you say to the children, what do you see and what do you notice? And you challenge them. We call it our building challenge. You challenge them to create it. Already in your head, you're thinking, wow, these kids have to communicate. They're going to have to use math language. They're going to have to engage with questions and answers. They're going to have to learn how to listen to each other. They're going to be having to problem solve. That doesn't look right. That looks right. That kind of language is really going to come out of this. It can also be done on a tabletop. So you can use any materials to do this building challenge. I've seen it done with Lego. We've seen it done with bamboo blocks, with big wooden blocks, with small wooden blocks. You can use anything. You can really use any materials you'd like. But the idea is that you took this picture from different perspectives, and then you have the children take the time to communicate and collaborate to reconstruct it. So in our challenge, it was really interesting. Cheryl and I did this for a few weeks with the children, and each day we would talk a little bit about what our groups were noticing. So the group that I had was really looking at the size and the shape and the direction. They were having really rich conversations about, oh, that one's too big, that one's too short, that one's, oh, it needs to be more round, we need a rounder block. So I was hearing a lot of mathematical conversations and language coming out of my group. They were noticing, and then they were altering. So if you think of that problem solving and innovation area in the curriculum, this is huge for that. They were altering and noticing differences. They were going back and checking their work, and then they were having rich conversations about how they could alter it. However, Cheryl and her group, this was in the first few weeks, Cheryl and her group had a completely different experience. Mine was very, very much based in mathematics, and Cheryl's was based more in personal and social connections.
I had children yelling and pushing and talking over top of each other, and I think as an educator's perspective, sometimes we say, okay, this probably wasn't a good small group. We'll have to think of something else for these children. But that was such an insightful experience that I had with these children, because it gave me insight as to what was also happening during play. It was also some children that were really struggling with vocalizing how to enter and exit play. And then I could really practice these skills within a small group. So I could embed some of that language of how to ask for pieces or how to share our thinking in different ways, and to slow down. And a lot of it was just persevering with staying together and staying through the task. And it was interesting, as I did this with them for a few times, these skills I was then seeing being scaffolded into play. A lot of fires were not needing to be watered down, because their capacity with the language and problem solving together was coming together through these small groups, and is really supporting them when they were playing independently.
And you think of how powerful, I love the comments, but how powerful is a small group when it gets at almost every frame in the document. We are planning, sometimes we plan these groups because they got to learn how to write an A in their name, and that's okay. But sometimes, let's think how we can go untraditional. How can we create these groups and problems for the children to solve that could be a larger group, and how can we connect them so that they can engage in something that's multi-curricular?
A similar idea is we had some bamboo blocks, and a lot of the children were wanting to save their work, so we took this as a spark for one of our small groups, and we took pictures of their structures, and then we had the children try and recreate what it is that had been built. And so a lot of conversation again about size, shape, perspective, persevering came up again. And then as this went through a week or two, we ended up scaffolding it into a challenge binder where kids could access it and reflect on their previous challenges, and then also some of the others that were being developed in the classroom as well.
It's a great question, Liz. And sometimes those groups will last a little longer, especially if it's the one that's engaged with an educator, or sometimes we might do it for a couple of days. So they might be in that same small group for a couple of days. So it can go lots of different ways. And if you're seeing these things and you don't have that same structured time as we do, that's okay. Maybe you're going to do this challenge during Learning Center times. There's nothing wrong with that either. Remember, everything that we're sharing is something that works for us in our context with our children. And whatever works for you and your teaching partner is okay. Give yourself permission to figure out what works best for you. A lot of these examples that we share today, they're going to be things that you can use at any time during the day. It doesn't have to be during that small group instruction time either. That's just something that works for Cheryl and I. And we want to share that with you because it's been a huge rethinking for us. But it doesn't mean it's going to work for you and your schedule and your school and all of those pieces. So always be reflective. No matter what PD you go to, always think, will this work for me? And why will it work or why will it not? And how can I make something similar work? It's okay if it's not exactly that. That's normal. So this is another great video that I think you're really going to enjoy. It's two students in our class, and they are engaged with barrier games. Barrier games are amazing. Cheryl and I remembered our love for barrier games after we read The Multiple Paths of Literacy last year. So we want to share this clip, and when you come back, you can show us a green check and maybe share some of your thoughts. Just click on the YouTube link so that you can watch that too. Okay, it looks like 32 people have checked yes, so we're almost there. Some people might just not have checked that green check mark. I'm going to give about 30 seconds. There we go. Look, there's a question, and you guys are answering it for us. You can use anything to make a barrier. Lots of people are wondering about how to make a barrier. Those are just random pieces of plastic that we had. Binders, Amanda, is probably the easiest way, I would agree. Super easy. Just get a binder, open it up. You can use Bristol board, you can use poster board, but something like a binder is sort of a little bit more sturdy. So with this activity, it would have probably, barrier games would have probably been practiced in a small group with one of us at first. So we might have done this with 6 children and a couple, so 3 pairs. and practiced and talked to them and coached them and supported them in learning how to use their language. And then after we've done that in a small group for a while, then it might become more independent and we might have it out as a more independent small group. So first we might do it with us. And then later on, it might be a small group that they can go to independently. And we love this activity as well because you can do barriers with so many different things. It's great, Amanda's saying you can do it with your bodies. You can do it with literacy. You can have whiteboards. We sometimes have whiteboards in front of them that they can use. There's so much language. They have to listen. They have to be able to ask questions to clarify their thinking. There's often mathematical language involved if you're using shapes or numbers. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. You can provide the children with Lego, and they can build something with Lego. As long as they have the same thing on either side of the barrier, there's lots of things you can do. I love Amanda's idea. It's such a cool idea. It's something that maybe we'll even try in the gym. You could put a big mat up in the gym, and you could have your body, like Amanda said, go in one position, and then the other, instruct the person on the other side, and then move the barrier down and see if your bodies match. It's a really cool concept, and it takes a lot of practice, but once they've practiced, they really start to understand it.
So with hearing some of these extensions and adaptions, we want to open it up to you guys and think about what small group activities have you engaged with that were less traditional and spanned across the curriculum. So again, you can share it in the chat, the microphone. You could also extend it out to Twitter using the hashtag Connecting Learners or hashtag OTF Connects. That way, again, after today, we can go back and reflect with some of your ideas as well. If you even have any photographs you could share with maybe a little description, sometimes that visual also helps.
Sensory play can be great for small groups, for sure, especially depending on the needs. Some children need to have kinesthetic things happening or something to engage with their senses. Absolutely. That's a great idea, taking them out for nature walks. It's sometimes nice to have a small group to do something like that too. This week we've been studying rain, and when it was pouring this week a couple of times we've gone outside with umbrellas or with our raincoat stuff on just to experience the rain and engage with conversation outdoors. Coding and tech, great ideas for a small group that are a little bit less traditional because they also involve language and mathematics. STEM is great ideas, maker spaces, fantastic. And sometimes some of those things might be great for small group engagement during learning centers too. So like Cheryl and I said, we also do engage with small group learning, but it's not that skill practice that we're doing during the small group structured time. Process art, great. Dice are great for everything. Osmo's fantastic. Baking, we do a lot of baking during learning centers too because again, it takes a little bit more time.
I love that idea of even partnering up with some older grades to scaffold some skills.
Fantastic. So we're going to share a few more examples because I know that sometimes it's really helpful to just see some practical examples of what's happening in a classroom. And afterwards, like Cheryl said, we would love for you to tweet out a photo. Maybe it's a small group that you've used, maybe it's something that you've done in the past, and use those hashtags so that we can all see visually what those look like, because what a great thing to be able to click on that hashtag and see all these practical ideas that we can take and adapt and make work for the children based on their needs and interests in our rooms too.
So here's a more traditional approach, but again, it could be adapted many different ways. Singing Five Little Monkeys Jump on the Bed. You can do this with song and using your bodies and having the kids move themselves to compose and decompose. And then also thinking about manipulatives of how they could move the manipulatives. And then once they have a grasp of that, even maybe just adding a little tweak by adding the numerals or dot patterns so that they're also getting that recognition and exposure, again, through another lens.
I think that's a great idea, and Cheryl shared that singing piece. We often think that we only can sing and play games like that in a whole group, but sometimes there's a group that really needs that instruction, and so it's okay to do that in a small group sometimes too, and there can be a lot of value in doing that in a small group.
And again, going back to thinking of your needs of the children, if you are having those children that are maybe struggling sitting for that period of time, thinking about how you can make it more kinesthetic to their learning.
Lots happens in 15 minutes. You'd be surprised at how much we can get accomplished. And to be very fair, sometimes it goes a little longer and sometimes it goes a little shorter. It depends. We always read the energy levels and engagement and self-regulation that's happening in our room and use that as an indicator to support us. We have been together for 5 years, so we do read each other and the children a lot better than if we were just in our first year together. But we do find sometimes it goes a little longer and sometimes a little shorter, but we also don't turn the lights off and say, small groups over. We transition groups one at a time. So the small groups are very intentionally backed onto nutrition break, and so because we don't want a big lineup at the sink, we will transition one group at a time so that they can have space and time to get their materials organized, to wash their hands, and so some groups might go a little bit longer naturally, and some might go a little shorter based on where they are and what they're doing. So we really slow down and transition everything. We never ever transition as a whole group no matter what in our day. And that also supports that timing, because with some of these activities that we're going to show you, you'll see that they might like a little bit more time. And so we might leave that group to last, so they may end up getting 20 or 25 minutes depending on how the transitions go. So it is a bit of an art after you get going, but that's sort of how we structure that and support that. Another traditional small group, sometimes we just give them time to practice reading the books that we've been looking at. Here you can see he's just using sticky notes to recreate sentences. Simple, really simple, but it's an opportunity, again, for these students to practice that skill. So guided reading is something that's more of a traditional small group. And we make sure we don't do guided reading with all children, because not all children need guided reading. A lot of our children are not anywhere close to ready to write, to ready to read. So we have other things that we're doing with them, whether it be shared reading or, like we said, a read aloud. So we are really strategic in who's reading with us too and who's ready. So sometimes we do a read aloud in a small group. And like I said earlier, I think we have sometimes 10 to 12 children, but we found that's a lot more effective than doing a read aloud for 28 children. It helps to be able to engage more when they want to talk. We can sometimes sit on the floor with the children to read to them. It's a little bit more intimate in reading, and it also allows for more voices to be heard and more children to feel comfortable in sharing. So we do a lot of read alouds in our small group time, but that means if I have 10 or 12 children reading with me, then there's only 14 to 16 children dispersed among other groups. So sometimes that really helps us as well in terms of that small group too.
Again, we've already heard a little bit in the chat that we're hearing that some of the people are doing coding in their classrooms. Coding is great for directionality, spatial awareness, communication with peers, development of language. Essentially, you're giving commands and routing your way through. Coding is great. It's essentially the skills for computer programming. So you can see some of the pre-coding activities here, and we're also going to show you some apps through the next video that give you a little bit more insight as to how it is used. If you want to, coding's a big topic right now. If you want to learn more about it, you can also look up Deanna McLennan. She has a lot of great resources, information on coding, as well as there's also great YouTube links out there as well.
So we're going to share the link just to watch a little video on Osmo Coding. That's a program we have in our classroom. Codable is also a free app that you can use. But Molly's going to share that link with you. So again, take a minute to watch that video and then show us a green check mark after you've seen it. And maybe if you've tried coding in some way, when you come back, share a little bit about how you've tried coding in your classroom, because it does really integrate social interactions and directionality, math, and language. So take a minute to watch that video and then come back, show us that green check mark, and let us know if you have any little tips or tricks about coding and how you got started with that. Karen, I like when you talked about the offline coding activities. So that first example we shared, we have like that unplugged coding or pre-coding stuff. That's really important, especially before they start to engage with the technology pieces, because we want to ensure that children are understanding what they're doing. Coding's a big, big topic, but we did want to share it because I feel like it's something that really engages with all 4 frames as well. It's something that does engage with all of those 4 frames. So the foods is a great one. Thanks for sharing that, Stephanie. And we love Osmo too. Karina, we have the Osmo. There's a literacy and a math one. It's an engaging thing. We don't put our Osmo out during learning centers. It's only a small group thing. Great. Learning carpet and obstacles. That's really awesome, Sarah. We were just at a workshop on the weekend where they talked about using obstacles and arrows and things to do that too. It was great. The Osmo bot, I know that the sisters there, they're coding experts, so you could always check them out on Twitter too. They do lots of great stuff with technology. Sometimes the cool thing with coding, if you want to get some of these tools, is that coding really spans from K to 6. So a lot of the tools can be shared within a school. So you might, like if you bought a little B-Bot or if you bought Osmo, you might be able to share that within classrooms because it's not something you need every day. Look at all these great ideas. Hundreds carpets are great for coding too because they have that natural grid. 10 frame, that's such a great way to start. Great. So, a few more examples. We just wanted to share some more just so you can see in context the things that are happening. Sometimes we have very open-ended activities, and our intention is for the children to communicate, to collaborate, maybe to build and engage. So sometimes that is our intention. We might put children who don't always necessarily engage with each other. We want to encourage certain conversations. So we are strategic in that too. So you can see on the left here, we had magnetiles out. Often they try and build with height. These children, we put out measuring tapes and rulers, and they were engaging with that. On the light table, we had different shapes. And this child, it wasn't a provocation, but they started naturally building patterns and engaging with patterns and things like that as well.
Thinking about your sensory learners, you know, what materials could you add to Play-Doh or sand or water? That way it can create a sense of calm as they're going through that learning experience.
Fine motor and perseverance. Melting beads are such a great calming strategy in our classroom. It takes a lot of time and patience to put those things together, and a lot of patterning and great conversations as they engage with that. So we often will do melting beads, and a child who goes to melting beads may go there for a few days in a row until they finish. So that is one of the small groups that we're a little bit flexible with, because we might say, you're going to start there, and then we set them up higher, and they come back to that the next day too. Board games. So we do a lot of games with our volunteers or in small group first. And once the children are independent and being able to play, we do a lot of board games during small group time. So Hi-Ho Cheerio, super easy, great game. Trouble, you can see on the right we have Trouble there, or Frustration, I forget what it's called. But in that game, we only put out one person to move around. So we sort of modify it depending on the children that are playing. And you can see in that photo, this little girl took all the numbers off of the wall for our number line, and she wasn't able to recognize the numeral on the dice. So she used the numbers, and she looked, okay, there's a 5, then she would count the number of dots, and then she moved that many spaces. So what an amazing skill to see as her and a partner worked together, and they said, oh, I never used to know how many that was either, so I use these numbers on the number wall, on the number line, and because they're magnetic, the children can take them off and engage with them. But playing games is such a powerful way to engage during that small group time, and often games can be played in 10 to 15 minutes for sure. Sometimes we make up really simple games. Don't overthink it. We use cups, and we play matching games with cups, and we can put any object underneath depending on what we're thinking about. So here we have some cups out, and we just put different shapes. So they lift up 2 cups, they didn't find a match, they put them back down. You could do it with letters or numbers. Very, very simple, but the children love it, and we're not overthinking it, and it's not taking us hours to set it up or make it. Sometimes we will use that small group time as well to engage with project work. So we do use our gym time when half our class goes to gym, or some children go to gym and some children stay. But sometimes during that small group time, a group will be engaged in a part of project work. And so we did a baby project where we were measuring how big the baby was. So we traced the baby, and then that week, a few children took time to investigate how could they measure it. Some measured the perimeter, some measured the length, some measured the area. They used different tools to measure it, but we gave them that time during that small group time to spend time working on that piece of the project.
This is another example from the project. After a visit with the baby, the mother had explained how she uses a lot of black and white images and patterns to help stimulate brain and eye growth with the baby. So we tried to make our own that we could try with the baby when they came back in for their next visit. So we just provided some paper, some shapes, some rulers, some pencils, so you can see some of the math that's coming out, the art, the social emotional of how the baby's going to engage with it when they come back for their next visit. So again, an untraditional way of bringing project work out, and another way to see lots of areas of the curriculum unfold.
So if you want to read more or hear some of these messages in another context, or maybe even share some of the thinking with colleagues, we're going to share the link for our blog. We wrote a little blog about small group instruction, so we're going to share that link with you here. And you can take some time to look at that. If you have some questions even after the fact, please let us know. There's the link there. And again, just be mindful that this is what works for us. This is what works for us after lots of years together, reflecting on what makes sense. We come from a school where most of our children come not knowing any letters, not knowing many numbers. Most can't write their name. And so we also have a very, very high English language learner population. So we strongly believe in the power of play. We have 3 times during our day where we have very, very big blocks of uninterrupted play. But we also have seen a tremendous, tremendous improvement in so many of the skills that the children need in order to be even more successful in play. So we practice their names, and by October, our children were engaged with writing at a level that we've never seen before. Those little short moments to practice skills provided so much confidence during their learning center time, and that way we also weren't stifling the play by stopping them and saying, this is how you make an A, this is how you make a B. We do that in the context of play, but if they've practiced outside of that, then it's given them a chance to kind of prep and practice for some of that too. I hope that makes sense. You have to do what works for you. You have to do what works for your team. So we're going to open it up to see We have a few minutes before we do some feedback and wrap up. But, you know, do you have any questions that we haven't got to? We really tried hard. There's a lot of people. We tried to keep up with the chat. Is there any questions that you have that we can help you with in order to support your learning? Stephanie, it's not that we never put them out during centers. It's a good question, but we don't have them out at the same time. So for example, with magnetiles, if those were a part of our small groups, those wouldn't be something that's out during learning centers at the same time. So sometimes we'll use things in our small group, and then later in the year, they might be something that's out as a provocation, for sure. It's not so black and white, but we try to make sure that what they're going to during that small groups is different than what they're going to during learning centers. But even whiteboards, for example, the whiteboards are always there as a tool. However, we might invite those students to come to whiteboards at that small group time. So it's not quite black and white. How do you let the kids know where to go? So we have that Google folder, and our kids are really in tune with that now. So we just say, you four, this is where you are today. You four, this is where you are. You two are here. You two are here. And this group is with Miss Emmerich, and this group is here. So we just kind of plot them out. So the first time they go, we're coming in from outside. They change their shoes, and then we let them know what group they're going to. So it's just a natural transition. And the second time, we're transitioning to the small groups from that large group instruction. So we just call the groups one at a time, and they slowly move to each of their areas.
Hannah, to answer your question, during Learning Center time, we use the same sort of role as we do in the small group. So if one educator is really down and engaged in play and really documenting a learning experience, the other one is up and supporting and facilitating. There are times when we are both down and we're able to engage depending on how the room is going. And then there's also days where sometimes we're just both up. But for the most part, we usually use the rule of thumb as one down, one up to support the room.
And we absolutely do small groups during Learning Center time, but they're more informal usually. And yeah, we do use that strategy for sure. Jessica's asking, do we plan for the week? Yes, we do. At the end of every week, we think about what do children still need, which groups do we want, is there anything that we want to keep, what are we going to change, and we sort of play with our ideas and sort of go from there. And Amanda's asking, what if they don't want to go or you flip them? That is a piece of the puzzle for sure too. We have a lot of big conversations at the beginning of the year and individually with students, and we talk about why. Why are we going to these small groups? And we talk about them as a time for practice. And then we talk to the children and we say, remember, outdoors, we have 2 times in the day where you get to make all the choices as to where you're going and how you're learning. And even during that indoor learning centers, we never choose where you're going, and we don't choose what you need to do in your learning. But during these small group times, Miss Emmerich and I, we think really carefully about what it is that you could practice that's going to help you to do even more learning during those other times. And so we try and have those conversations, and more times than not, our children really start to understand and see that because they've seen their own growth documented through the year too. That's a great question too, Stephanie. Again, you have to think about what works for you. We didn't like doing them during our Learning Center time because we found we were pulling children from their play. But if it's working for you and your partner, that's great. If that's working for you and your partner and you're able to engage in play and document learning and you're feeling good about all of that, that might be something that works for you too. So we're going to stop there. Lots of really great questions. Please feel free to send us an email or to connect with us on Twitter, and we will continue to direct you to blogs that might help you, or if we can answer your questions, we'd love to do that too. I know Molly has a little feedback form, and it is really helpful for OTF. If you can stick around for just 2 or 3 more minutes, she'll let you know sort of what your role is, and that helps them in planning future webinars as well. So take what you saw today, think about how it applies to your class, what makes sense for you and your team, and go from there. So thank you.
So thanks a lot, Tracy and Cheryl. That was absolutely amazing. And like you said at the beginning, if there's one thing people can take back to the class, it's been successful. And if I had my class again, I'd definitely be doing that building challenge. That looked fabulous. So as, thanks very much. So as Tracy and Cheryl mentioned, OTF would love to have your feedback. There's 3 ways that you can get to the feedback survey. The first one is clicking directly on the link that's on the page. This is the only live link in the presentation. The second is by going to the link that I'm just going to put back in the chat again. And the third will be to, when you log out of the session, actually it'll take you directly to the feedback survey, and you'll be able to download a certificate. We know there was a little bit of a problem, but that's been sorted out. So we'd really appreciate you doing that. We have several sessions coming up, and I see that Tracy and Cheryl have another one coming up May 3rd. And there are a couple also on coding and others for kindergarten as well. So you could visit the OTF Connects page to see what's coming up and register for those. There's still some money available for AQ courses from the ministry for math, technology, or kindergarten. So you can, again, go to the OTF Connects or OTF site to learn how you can apply for that. And finally, just keep connected on social media for OTF activities. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming tonight. And thanks, Tracy and Cheryl, for an incredible session.
Thank you, guys. It was so great. Thanks for all